Okay.
Cheers, Dad.
Cheers. Look in the eye.
Look in the eyes.
It's a good potato vodka, that.
So what do we have here? Growing up, we always celebrated Dad's birthday on May 7th. But that's not the real date. He was always known as Gene, but that's not his given name. Was our family Jewish? Until recently, I had no idea. In retrospect, I think my dad had good reason to want to protect us from the truth of what happened. He carried it, or maybe buried it, for most of his life. What good would saddling his children with this burden do? In 2001, Dad was invited by his friend Roman Polanski to work on The Pianist. I think that the experience of revisiting the occupation on film was cathartic for him. Slowly, he started to open up about the past. Maybe his story of survival wasn't a burden to be hidden, but a triumph to be shared. So I went to Poland, and together we drank some vodka and dusted off the old photos and memories.
I was born as Witold Bardach. Under the German occupation, Gestapo was looking all over the place. It was necessary for me to change my name. So I was not even safe to get out on the street. It was then the Polish underground which provided a set of documents, identities for me. Well, I became Gene Gutowski. My family's on both mother's and father's side lived in Lwow. Lwow was an extraordinarily interesting city, a mixture of Poles, Ukrainians, Jews, Armenians. There were churches, synagogues of every religion. The architecture ranged from Renaissance to the Viennese secession, as they used to call sort of a Viennese equivalent of French Belle Epoque. And it was highly, highly enjoyable and pleasant place to live. I have some of my happiest memories of my childhood in that wonderful city. I was very, very close to my father. I admired him. He used to take me on Sundays, beautifully dressed in his gray flannels and a dark jacket and a Borsalino hat at a dashing angle. Take me by the hand in my little sailor's suit to the restaurant in Lwow, which served the great Polish delicacy, flaczki or tripe. And I still have the memory and the taste for that food to this day. These strong males in my family, whether it was my father or Uncle Bronislaw, even my Uncle Andrew, left an impact on me. This desire or the need to be elegant. And it's probably helped me survive the war. At no point, even at the worst moment of the occupation, Soviet or German, was I ever unshaved or not beautifully dressed or whatever. And come on now, what German would dare to kill such a nice-looking, good-smelling, elegant young boy? They wouldn't dare that. Mother was a very beautiful lady, gorgeous in fact. She studied music and wanted to make a career as a concert pianist. Every day, in the morning, the sounds of piano in a house. That was part of every day's background. It was her practicing.
Jews have lived in Lwow since the 14th century, 100 years after its establishment. During these centuries, they lived in two communities, one outside the city walls and one inside. The two communities suffered all the troubles that visited the city. Invasion by the Tatars, the Turks, the Swedes, the Cossacks, and the great fires which burned down the city's wooden houses.
Both mother and father, though they were born Jewish, they're absolutely non-practicing. I say I've never took part in any holidays or didn't even know where they were. I was never inside of a synagogue. Though I used to go to churches quite a bit. It's a very difficult world to describe, particularly to people who only sort of think in terms of black and white, who don't understand the areas of grayness. And maybe even look with contempt on people who totally assimilated. But there was a history of many Jews in Poland, they simply assimilated. The Jewish background became a liability only under the Nazi regime, when they suddenly, with the Nuremberg laws, if you only had one grandparent, according to that, you were Jewish. And that suddenly made one realize, wait a minute, we're Jewish. Or at least we looked upon by the Germans as being Jews, though feeling that we had nothing to do with it. But I was wrong. Of course we had something to do with it. We were one of them. Our charmed life came to a rapid end with an outbreak of war in 1939.
On September the 1st, 1939, the Nazi army smashed into Poland.
The defenses of Poland collapsed on the Western Front, and the Germans were moving rapidly in our direction. We packed up things quickly from the house, taking all the wrong things and leaving all the valuables and paintings and furniture and antiques, because we had no idea we were going to come back. We thought maybe it would just only be a few days. Nobody had any imagination what it was going to be like. So we left, never to come back. The roads were packed with refugees. It was complete chaos, and frequently German fighter planes would swoop low and strafe the people on the road. So many times we had to run, abandon cars and so on, run into the ditches, run into the woods, and they were simply strafing the civilians, leaving bodies. As we were heading for the Romanian border, in some little town not far from the border, a local official with two policemen stopped at the car, and at the point of a gun, he requisitioned the car from us to put himself and his family and escape to Romania, leaving us on the road. So, in that respect, our fate was sealed then and there.
Советское правительство считает своей священной обязанностью подать руку помощи своим братьям украинцам и братьям белорусам, населяющим Польшу.
The Soviet army entered from the east, crossed the Polish borders, and to our great shock, the Bolshevik hordes were upon us. This was a result of the Ribbentrop-Molotov Act. Ostensibly, they were coming to liberate the Polish peasants from the oppression of the landowner, which of course a lot of bullshit. They just came to take over that part of Poland. This was totally a different crowd than one is used to seeing now. Russian millionaires dressed in Armanis and driving big foreign cars. No, these were the primitive, unwashed, part Mongolian troops for the first time encountering the West, because for them Poland was West. Subjected to years of communist propaganda where people in the West were starving, whereas they were living in a paradise, they were somewhat shocked to see exactly the opposite. That the shops were full of luxury goods and people were beautifully dressed and so on.
Буржуазия jest egoistyczna, w imię miłości własnej gnębiła od wieków proletariat i serce jej nie załkało, kiedy pędziła do warsztatów pracy w ciemną noc dzieci robotnicze i kobiety, ażeby mieć tanią pracę, tanią siłę roboczą. Nie zapłakało serce burżuazji. My nie do serca burżuazji przemawiamy. Do niej przemawiać trzeba bagnetami, do niej trzeba przemawiać armatami.
My father was in jeopardy because he was a reserve officer. Secondly, he was a lawyer. He's a man of culture, of education, and so on. This was not what the new order was about. My mother's parents were property owners. They owned buildings, apartment buildings in the city of Lwow, until one day people came to him, make him sign papers allowing these properties to be nationalized. Overnight they became poor and owning absolutely nothing. So there was this continuous battle of survival under the Soviet occupation. At this point, I sort of had enough of education. I felt it was getting me absolutely nowhere. So I managed to get myself into an art school. Under communists, the constant mass meetings, the constant marches, the constant demonstrations. They always carry banners. They always carry large pictures of the leaders. Lenin was Stalin, was Marx, was Engels, was Voroshilov and Khrushchev even. So there was a tremendous demand for the large portraits. The students of the art schools were engaged to make these portraits. I managed to get into that group. Now, being the youngest, they gave me something nobody wanted to do, which was Marx. Marx was particularly labor-intensive because he had a long curly hair and a big beard. They were paying 30 rubles per glorious leader, which is very good money in those days, but provided you could turn him on. So after my unsuccessful life with Marx, I was managed, I don't know what I do, bribe somebody or something like that to allow me to do Lenin. And Lenin became my greatest friend because I could do him. I can do him to this day. I can, with my eyes closed, I can paint Lenin. He had no hair, he was bald. He had a little hair on the side of his head and a little pointed beard and a sort of Mongolian cheeks and Mongolian squinty eyes, and he was glorious. I could knock out 2 of them in a night and I was rich. So, I must admit, I was a teenage purveyor of a communist propaganda. So, I don't know I'll ever have to be responsible for that, but I admit I was. The lives under the Soviets, I was not pleasant or comfortable. It was not life-threatening. The various nationalities were jockeying for position. The Ukrainians under the Russian occupation, claiming that they were liberated by the Russians again. Everybody was being liberated by somebody. The Polish Serbs were being liberated. The Ukrainians were liberated. The poor Jews were liberated. And not liberated me.
Das Reichsministerium für Volksaufklärung und Propaganda. Reichsminister Dr. Goebbels verliest die Proklamation des Führers. Sie enthüllt zum ersten Mal vor der ganzen Welt die Verschwörung zwischen London und Moskau gegen Deutschland. Der Führer zieht nach monatelangem Schweigen nunmehr in 12. Stunde die noch einzig mögliche Konsequenz mit den Worten: Ich habe mich entschlossen, das Schicksal und die Zukunft des Deutschen Reiches wieder in die Hand unserer Soldaten zu legen.
With the German surprise attack, the Soviets were in panic. They just didn't believe, or at least Stalin didn't believe till the last moment that would ever happen. He thought he would establish a relationship of friendship with the Nazis, with Hitler, but it wasn't so. They were evacuating in panic and a hurry, and the Germans were advancing very rapidly, so that Lwow was taken in a matter of days. My family were quite foolish in their thinking, both my father and grandfather being German or Austrian officers. They thought they had nothing to be afraid of, whereas they had more to be afraid of from the Soviets. When the first German troops were riding into the city, there were Austrian troops. My grandfather was practically out on the street crying with joy. He thought, at last these are, as he said, these are his boys, the Austrian soldiers. Well, little did he know that a year later his boys would kill him. German officers, Wehrmacht or SS, came to my grandfather's house, looked over the apartment, and he was very proudly greeted him in German to tell him he was a colonel doctor in the Austrian army, show him his medals and decorations and so on. Well, they slapped him around. They broke up the cabinet with the medals, called him a dirty Jew, and left. I felt terribly sorry for my grandfather, but I was also, I was frightened. The official orders and announcements concerning the Jewish population in particular were very quickly announced. The first order, they had to wear an armband. Immediately I decided that I didn't want to be a part of it. I didn't want to wear an armband, I just wouldn't wear an armband. I moved freely through the city. There was nothing in my looks, in my speech, which in any way would give away that I was a non-Aryan. My, by that time, fluent knowledge of the German language, which is very unique, helped me a great deal. Only on one occasion, somebody had recognized me in a streetcar and started yelling aloud that there's a Jew and I should be caught and arrested. Obviously, I was able to get away. The Nazis started actions to arrest and deport a large portion of the Jewish population. They would come in sort of waves. And so everybody for that particular period of time, knowing that they are rounding people up, would try to hide and try to survive that particular period. My family, by giving the last pair of diamond earrings, well, my grandmother, made a deal with a driver for the Gestapo, where my whole family was hidden right behind the headquarters of a Gestapo in Lwow. There were garages. So in one of those garages, on top, under the roof, they were lifted there, even my own grandparents, into that hiding place to keep them there for a few days until the worst action was over. How they managed to stay quiet there, all I know is that I had to sneak in through the Gestapo motor park at night to help empty the chamber pots and also bring them some food and water. Somewhat of a risky operation that was. Lwow was a death trap. It was getting rapidly worse and worse. The degradation, the hunger, the striving for supply of food. There were still street executions. There were people being hung out of balconies, which I was a witness of. This is when I decided that I have to separate myself from my family, then at the age of 16, and I had to escape, or I'm just going to die. My sense of survival and appealing to survive was so strong, I just didn't want to die. I saw my grandparents, my mother's parents, being loaded onto the truck. Two old people who quarreled all their life because he was unfaithful and she was jealous. And suddenly there's two old people supporting each other, were taken helped onto the truck and shipped off. The last time I saw my mother was in the summer of 1942. At that time, to help support us, she, the beautiful lady, the concert pianist, was selling cakes from a tray. I remember stopping by, running through, busy as I was, to say hello to Mom. And she gave me a cake and kissed me, told me to be careful. That was the last time I saw her. Then a day or so later, I ran into my father, who was standing on a street, leaning against a fence, sort of like completely worn out and desperate, and he was crying. And when I came, I said, "What's the matter?" I said, "They've taken Mother."
Belzec operated only 7 months, between 17th of March 1942 and 16th of December 1942. That time were killed almost 500,000 Jews, mainly Polish Jews. 90% of the victims here were the Polish Jews, citizens of the pre-war Poland. There were the days, as we are estimating, when the Germans killed here between 15,000 to 20,000 people per day. There are the 33 mass graves in which are the ashes, bones, and even the bodies on the bottom of the people who were killed here. There were very different people. We know that in Galicia, most of the Jews in the bigger town were assimilated. They felt themselves as the Poles. In small towns where the Hasidim were Orthodox Jews. But generally, camp was created, was established only for the Jews. The people were segregated. Old people, invalids, babies who were without parents were taken to some place on the ramp. Other people were led to the undressing barrack. They had to undress. At first, men were sent to the gas chambers. SS men were afraid whole time that men will be this power who could resist. After the shaving of the heads, women with the children were sent to the gas chambers. Hair, it was the war important material. They produced from the hair socks for the German railway workers and mixed the hair with a normal textile, and they produced also mattresses for the German submarine. 1 kilogram of hair was 50 pfennigs. So now we can imagine how many heads should be shaved for 1 kilogram of hair. The first gas chamber was wooden shed. The walls and floor were covered by metal sheet, and by pipes was connected with the engine taken from the Soviet tank. So the people were killed by carbon monoxide. Some gassing procedure was 20 minutes. After 20 minutes, members of the Sonderkommando took the bodies to the mass graves. Handicapped people, invalids, babies were taken to a special place. It was one mass grave on the territory of the camp, which was called Lazaret, and they were shot on the edge of a lazaret. Whole time the fire was burned, so the people, before their death, saw how other people were burned in this mass grave.
It is my beautiful mother, I think of her most, yes. For a while we lived in the hope that maybe she was able to buy her way out with so many rumors that people were able to escape. Nobody escaped from here. Nobody. Nobody bought their way out, nobody escaped. They just went to their death. And I think it was great sadness of what horror she must have gone through. This beautiful young woman, naked, no hair, being pushed into a crowded gas chamber. Nobody, friends or family near her. But so many others have died like that, and the rest of my family. Pierwsza jest moja matka tutaj. Proszę?
Pierwsza początek zdjęcia. Nie wiemy, jak to jest przedstawione.
So, I'm happy that she's here, and the whole world coming here can see what a beautiful young woman she was. What bestiality, what animals they were to brought that horror upon people. To this day, I don't have an answer. I really don't know. I can understand it. I found myself at the Lwow railroad station. The train for Warsaw was leaving in the morning. As my capital, I took with me, I think, 5 or 6 sets of forged birth certificates, which I was hoping to sell in Warsaw because there was a demand for it. And these were very good birth certificates I obtained with the help of a parish priest. So I had them with me, lying there in the corner, waiting for the train in the morning. I thought, well, I'll be in Warsaw, sell that thing, and I'll be safe and maybe be able to help my parents. The light shone in my eyes, and there was a Ukrainian militia and a German SS man, Bahnhofschutz, demanding documents. So I produced mine, which were already under a false name, and the Ukrainian laughed and looked at me and says, I know you. You may not remember me, but I used to be a painter. I used to paint your grandparents' house. So the son of a bitch, who probably had a good job and got well paid, he was not going to turn me in, which he did. Janowska Street, which became infamous, was like a concentration camp. The selections were taking place there. Some fit for work, stronger young men or women were kept there. Others were sent off to death camps, primarily to Belzec. It was a big assembly field full of people sitting, waiting, and so on. There were guard towers. Policemen were coming with baskets, asking everybody to deposit their money, valuables, whatever, and so on. There was a orchestra playing. And one of the camp commanders, Szafira Rokita, I think it was called, he said even himself he was a musician. He was played in a band at one time. Always liked to work with the Jews because they were very musical. And even remember he made a few dance steps in the mud, tango steps to show how, he was good on his feet. And they were hanging some people for whatever crimes they might have committed in that camp. They were being hanged. Their robe was short, and so one of his men was hanging but choking. He was not enough of a rope to break his neck. Rokita ordered a kid to assist with the hangings, which the guy couldn't do. He broke down and was crying, so Rokita took his luger and shot him. He ordered me to throw myself at his feet and give it a good pull to help him die. It was not an offer I could refuse very well, so I was hanging on this guy's feet, helping him die. These bodies were cut off, and they were being taken in wheelbarrows to an area like sand pits. The barrels were tipped, and the bodies were rolled and pushed down into that pit, and eventually some lime or everything was thrown over them. So at this point, the Ukrainian guards wanted me to go down there also, and I realized once I got down, they were going to shoot me and execute me, so one less witness. At this point, I started screaming at him in German, saying that I was Szafira Rokita's personal assistant and interpreter, and they'll be really punished if any harm comes to me. And true enough, they didn't shoot me, and so I marched myself back. Then at night, when it got dark, open staff cars came in with some Gestapo and SS officers, and they started a selection. So people were going to line up, and it's, you're old, you're here, you're young, you're here, there's going to be death or life. I was trying always to stay out of that circle, just trying to find out what really was going on before I commit myself to either one or the other. And true enough, they formed a third group, because as it often in such mass action, some people were arrested on the streets who had valid documents. Maybe they worked for the German army, maybe they shouldn't have been arrested, whatever, they had a good reason to be released. And a small column was being formed for them to march out of the camp but they had to sleep outside of barbed wire in a ditch there because there was a police hour, so they couldn't actually go back to the city. Somehow, I managed to get myself into that group. Rokita recognized me, even said to his other German officers, you know, he's ein feiner Junge, he's a good boy, he really helped me. And I joined that group and I marched out of the gate. Next to me was a girl. She held my hand and she obviously was quite nervous, and yet gave me courage. Once we got ourselves out the gate in the dark, in a ditch, having to spend the night together, we made love there, quietly in a ditch outside of Janowska Street. It was sort of like celebration of life. I made it to Warsaw, which was, to us, escaping from Lwow, it seems like a promised land. There were beautiful red tomatoes being sold everywhere, so that for a long time, until I realized some money, but whatever I had, I was living on tomatoes. They were very tasty, though. I contacted my aunt Stasia because of her pre-war connections to some high-ranking Polish officers. One of her friends was then commander of the Polish Underground Army, General Gutowski. She was his personal liaison. She didn't particularly want to have any close contact with me, but she did help me to get a place to live. I was completely on my own, which is, when you're looking back at it, was a terrifying thing to be on your own when you're 16 years old, pretending that you're old and you have to know they have to totally depend on yourself. Because what could my poor parents do for me while I was still alive? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. My father, to this day, I'm not sure how he died. I understand and been told that he tried to, with a group of other ex-officers, friends of his, Polish officers, they tried to escape to Hungary through the mountains and so on, but somebody betrayed him, and so he was arrested in Lwow and executed. My brother Roman was then 12 years old, stayed in the custody of my uncle Bronislaw. Roman wrote to me, pleading letter, would I come and save him? You know, my dear brother, you know, could I save him? Of course I couldn't. So, some months after that, when now a ghetto was being formed in Lwow with the wires or walls around it, and their position became untenable, my uncle Bronislaw gave my brother poison. Being a doctor, he had it, so he killed himself in 1943. I wasn't streetwise at all, I became streetwise. Suddenly you had a 360-degree vision. You knew exactly who may be looking for you just a little too long, who is taking interest in you, how to deal with that, how to walk away. It's amazing how quickly one can get used to living in fear. It becomes a way of life, really. So it's a question of living in fear or trying to be fearless. I'm not quite sure what gave me I cannot think of a better word than chutzpah, to behave the way I did. Maybe the very fact that I had a few times encounter with the Germans, that I was let off free, nobody arrested me, made me more and more self-assured and risk-taking. People were dying left and right and being taken to camps, imprisoned, executed. I had a strange sense of immortality.
Let go bombing.
I managed to get myself a job working for the Junkers, German aircraft manufacturers, at the Warsaw airport in Okęcie. They had a big repair base for the U-88s, 87, which would come in, shut up from the Russian front, were repaired and sent back. Speaking German, I used to crawl through the planes, the bomb compartments, the cockpit and everything, checked all the wiring, there was proper, there was no damage, destroyed and so on, and make a report. And didn't take very long. When dealing with equipment, a scheme has occurred to me, which could be formed both patriotic and profitable. Made a point of becoming friendly with a German Luftwaffe soldier also working in that radio storage as an inspector. He was a radio specialist. And it didn't take me very long in a private conversation to establish that he was very, very anti-Nazi. In fact, hated Hitler, they hated the whole thing, and was ready to work with me, possibly removing some of that equipment from the airport, knowing that it would go to the Polish underground. I made contact to the Polish underground, and they said, well, they would want to see one set on a trial basis. Karl Christian, being a technician, drew up a connecting scheme because it wasn't simple. At that time, it wasn't just one unit. Obviously, I couldn't take it out of the airport. There were guards at the gate, which he in uniform could do. A Luftwaffe with a rucksack, nobody even bothered to stop him. He would walk over to the house where I lived, he would come up and give me a piece of equipment, which then I put under the bed. Then he would stay, I would feed him vodka, sausage, and send him back on his way. It was a Christmas, and I had a lot of vodka, we both got drunk. At one point, Karl Christian let out a big fart. And he stood up, raised his arm, and yelled, "Heil Hitler." Well, that started us off, and through the rest of the evening, we were drinking, farting, and yelling, "Heil Hitler." One day in the morning, I got a call that the Gestapo with dogs came looking for me, obviously because of our radio stations. And I was quite correct. The business got a little too big. I figured I'd take them about 10 minutes for the SS or for the Gestapo to get over to where I was living, because I was sure they would give me the address. I left everything behind and ran over to my girlfriend's house to speak to her mother, Dr. Zenona Rewerska, and tell her my predicament. And she said that she would hide me, that she would keep me. Being a non-Aryan out on the street without an armband, that in itself was immediate deportation or execution. Not only were you at risk, but anybody who helped you, anybody who helped a Jewish person, even with food, drink, or shelter, there was a death penalty of that. Dr. Zenona Rewerska became my surrogate mother, loved me like a mother. She, at the risk of her life, let me stay in her apartment in this building. There was the entrance right here. I remember that on a few occasions, there's a man who was looking for me because, what was his name? You remember his name?
Kozłowski.
Yes, yeah.
Targowa 15. Targowa 15 Street. Targowa Street.
Right. Yeah, perfect memory. Mr. Kozłowski, he was my landlord in Targowa 15. And so when Gestapo couldn't find me, they told him that he has to help find me, otherwise they're going to take him. So, on various occasions, he tried to break into your apartment.
Tam potem ci chłopcy z Akago trochę nastraszyli z mamy grupy, że jak coś się tobie i mamie stanie, to go rozwalą i wtedy oni trochę dali ci spokój.
What happened was that he was, really persistently tried to sign in as your mother's patient to be able to come into the apartment to see if I was there.
Że tam było możliwość ciebie wyprowadzenia, bo były frontowe i kuchenne schody.
Tak.
Jeszcze jak przed wojną były. I tędy jak oni weszli i Hankę zaczęli szantażować i tak dalej, to myśmy z tobą zbiegli kuchennymi schodami na dół i jeszcze sobie przypomniałem, że są przejścia, bo się bawiłem w policjantów i złodziei. Są przejścia pod ziemiami i tak się wyprowadziłem, wyszedłeś na Targową, z tylko frontowym klatką schodową, nikt w ogóle nie wiedział, żeś ty w tym domu był.
Those basements were connected with each other, where you could enter the basement in one part of the building, you could exit altogether in a different part of the building, different exit, and a different street.
For you and for us, it is very comfortable in this time.
Yes, it was. So you're also helping to save my life, no?
No, yes, it is true.
Absolutely.
It is true.
When the time came, you know, for me to really, I had to leave. I couldn't, risk your and your family's, your mother's life. She got me a set of new documents.
Yes, I remember. Ty bądź łaskawy powiedzieć Adamowi tego, że ty w naszej nomenklaturze rewerskich to się nazywasz nie Gene Gutowski, tylko Witek Gutowski, bo takie miałeś wtedy namiary dokumentalne. Gene to mama się zdziwi, jaki on Gene jest, on jest Witek, kurczaki pieczone.
As far as the family is concerned, he said, what is this Gene? I mean, he's always been Witek to us, and he's Witek, and he remained Witek, which is from Witold, which is obviously my name, Witold Bardach, and we've been good friends ever since. I started a new life as Eugeniusz Gutowski, courtesy of the Polish underground. A common way for people to change identities and get out of a city would be to join a labor organization, German labor organization, working for the German armies everywhere, was organization TOT. Riga became available. There was a company, Polish company called Metzger, and I signed with them in my new capacity as a bookkeeper. I mean, I've never kept books, I know nothing about the accounting. The train was blown up by the partisans before it got to Riga, but apparently it was sort of a daily occurrence. Nobody was particularly hurt. They had to put the locomotive back on the track, and we continued to go to Latvia. In charge were two Polish gentlemen who greeted me warmly and said, I'm so happy you came here because we must go to Warsaw to consult with the main office, but we'll be gone only 2-3 days, we'll be back. Would you please, in the meantime, look after everything for us? I said, sure. Except that they've gone and they never came back. The German supervisors came and said, where are they? I don't know, they've gone to, and you, I'm the bookkeeper, okay, you're the boss now. So suddenly I find myself as the head of a construction company of about 100 guys who were totally unwilling to work. And I became somewhat of a local celebrity because with Christmas coming, we had a big Christmas tree, but absolutely no means of decorating. And I had an idea, and I've got boxes of German army condoms, which were issued to the soldiers. I blew them up to make balloons out of them and painted figures of saints, Santa Claus, and all these things on the blown up condoms and strung up and made a condom tree, Christmas tree. It was a big success. The German officers, used to come from all over Riga to look at it, congratulate me, and so, I was getting extra rations of booze, cigarettes, and so on.
After advancing as far as Riga, the Russians were temporarily forced back a short distance during the second week of August. It is this short-lived success which the Germans are here exploiting. Tanks and motorized units cut through the Russian barrage in front of Riga, and a large number of Stukas re-established land communications with combat divisions in Latvia.
This was Germany on the verge of defeat. These were very dangerous days because they were on site executing deserters, executing people left and right, so one really had to be careful not to be shot. With the advances of Soviet army, the Germans were running away from Latvia, and they were loading up on ships to make the perilous crossing of the Baltic to the German harbor. I have decided I didn't wish to be liberated by the Russians again. I've had the pleasure once before, and I said, thank you, I'll pass. I managed to persuade the transport officers that me and my company were essential to the German victory, and that we have to be loaded on a ship to continue our essential work for the further glory of the Nazis. Some bribes got me onto one of the ships, and the convoys were then crossing the Baltic, losing most of the convoy to the Russian submarines. I remember staying on the deck of the ship, wrapped in a life jacket I stole off a sleeping German soldier, better hedrons than me. Quite spectacular in the night to see them exploding and going down. Put us in trains and moved us all the way from the Baltic, being strafed by American and British planes right across Germany into Austria. I didn't like that journey because, so what a silly way to get killed at the end of a war by your own planes. And thus, I found myself in a little town in Austria, aptly called Judenburg. I had to work in the woods, cutting trees and carrying the logs onto the trucks. Then suddenly, it was all over. The guards ran away. The Soviets were approaching. So I took all my earthly possessions, which were very, very few. But one of them was my lovely Gary Cooper double-breasted suit, which I was carrying with me just for the occasion of liberation, so I could dress up very nicely and join the free world again, looking like something. It was an extraordinary journey because there were masses of humanity on the road, day and night, running away from the Russians. I can even tell you the mixture. There were former enemies, there was the SS, there was the escaped prisoner of war, there were concentration camp enemies, there were Jews, Poles, Italians, Romanian Air Force. I mean, the whole mixture of people who became subjugated by the Germans or the Nazis or collaborated with them, now escaping jointly, saying, okay, we'll settle our differences later. Now let's get out of harm's way now. Nearing the River Ants, I put my rucksack on a little horse-drawn wagon of some Hungarians who had it, and I went forward on foot. People from the back started yelling that the Russian tanks were coming, and true enough, looking back, I could see from a distance the dust clouds of the Russian tanks were making on the road. I said, well, I'm just not going to wait for them. I could see crossing the bridge that there were American tanks and American military vehicles on the other side. I ran across the bridge, just about collapsed at the feet of an American soldier. He helped me, and I said in perfect English, thank you very much, so thank you. He was absolutely amazed that he found such a nice boy who spoke English, and went into his vehicle, got me first taste of whiskey, and that was that. German army units with their officers, with their vehicles that came across, ready to go into prisoner of war camps, but this being the first one, so the American officers and MPs in jeeps were herding them like shepherds. In fact, it was a total chaos. This obviously was a front unit. There was a colonel and other American officers. And there were German officers who were reporting to them and asking for instructions. They started translating. There were high-ranking German officers, I think was even a general, asking me to please tell the American officer this and this one will tell them that. I said, well, that's the place to be. I looked at myself and I looked absolutely awful. I looked around, nowhere could I find my Hungarian card with my suit and this dirty old organization Todd uniform, which looked suspiciously like an army uniform, and I figured out the quicker I get out of it, the better, because somebody's going to stick me into the wrong, compartment here. I find myself in a German camp. And I went into town looking how I could get myself something to wear. Walking the street, I saw men's tailor, Herrenschneiderei, knock, knock. Finally somebody opened and said, look, there's nothing, absolutely nothing. There's no clothes, no suits, zero. I tried to close it in front of my face, at which point I produced my P-38. He opened it, realized I was not going to shoot him in perfect German, said, look, I just need a suit. I don't have any. Well, let's see what I have. Took me down to his workplace, and indeed, there were a lot of mostly uniforms, which were not collected, probably never will be, various Nazi officials, and a few private suits sort of finished were hanging there. I found one which just about fitted me. I was pretty skinny in those days. Maybe it was not my Gary Cooper suit, but I certainly looked different than what I did when I arrived. I went back looking for my American officers, and they suggested that I should go further north where there were headquarters of the counterintelligence corps that, for the 20th Corps, who they were sure could use my services as an interpreter.
That'll be 35 Russians, 12 Belgians, 3 French, and 3 Yugoslavs.
How many of those are women? 28 Russian women. And 11 Belgian boys with a priest. Yes, sir, we'll be ready for them.
There were very few linguists really in the CIC, unfortunately. I was very welcome. So at the end of the day, I was safely in a clean bed as part of an American unit. So it was a very long day, but in a way a very happy day. So that was the end of the war for me. The first few days after the war was extraordinary. The bridges on the Autobahn were blown up. The remnants of war material was still on the road. There were shot up tanks, and a lot of German planes were using the Autobahns as landing and starting places, were pushed and parked still on both sides of the Autobahns. Having lost my entire family, I enjoyed seeing a defeated Germany, and they were truly defeated. There was chaos, there was no food, there was millions of refugees milling about, not only Germans, but also the other nationalities of which the Germans had brought into Germany as forced labor. There were inmates of concentration camps. Every nationality had to be dealt with. Allied forces determined that anybody who's held certain rank above a certain level in any party or military or paramilitary or SS or Gestapo organization was to be automatically arrested, thrown into an internment camp, later to be dealt with. We had more than our hands full, just simply arresting people. Very shortly, I was officially pronounced as an acting agent in a counterintelligence corps, was given the privilege of wearing an officer's uniform with the insignia, and save for the fact that I was not an American citizen, had the same duties and responsibilities and the privileges of other American agents. Our powers were absolutely unlimited at the time. I would go to the office and pick up my day's work, and by myself, with a big .45 pistol, which was very persuasive because it was very large, and a pair of handcuffs, I would take off and arrest people, give them very politely, to give them 3 minutes to pack up their things, say goodbye to their families, which is more than they used to give me in my days, and pack them into a jeep and bring them to the prison in Starnberg. At one time I truly lost my temper. Otherwise I try to be very level-headed, behave properly, wouldn't touch anybody, wouldn't push, wouldn't shove, wouldn't beat anybody up, except for a couple of suspected werewolves, which were young Nazis. They were trained to eventually sabotage the Americans. I remember then when we captured a few, we gave them a good beating. But they deserved it. On this particular occasion, a German general walked in with all his decorations and medals. I was sitting alone, and he wanted to know if there was an officer around because he wanted to give himself up. I very politely said, well, I'll take you in. It's my pleasure. No. He could only turn himself to somebody of an officer's rank. And who was I? I mean, obviously we're looking at him with such contempt. And then something snapped in me. And I tore his epaulets off, and I tore his medals off. So much for giving himself up to somewhat of an equal or an officer's rank, because he, as a general, he couldn't be arrested by plain Polish or even Polish-Jewish refugee.
W roku 1939 w wojnie przeciwko Niemcom walczyłem. W którym pułku? W 3. Batalionie Repertowskim.
I was doing my job well, but I also learned of privilege. First, living in this baronial castle on the lake shore of Starnberg with a beautiful estate with its own boathouse, in which we had a motorboat and a sailboat. There were 6 of us drawing rations and foods for about 145 people, with plenty of drinks, with plenty of servants and so on. I quickly learned that I could commandeer any car I wanted, because there were requisitions from the Germans and standing in garages where anybody, particularly from CIC, can come and pick anything they want. Well, was I ever picking? Our excuse was that we needed those cars for undercover work. I mean, give me a break. Like a big supercharged Porsche or Mercedes, even a Maybach for undercover work. I quickly became the entertainment director for the unit. Using my connections, we were giving weekend parties, which became very famous for the party givers. I was in charge of the talent. Jugglers, dancers, all kinds of little nightclub acts, so we could give those wonderful parties on Saturday night. And this is how I met my future wife, Zilla, who was an American. She came to Europe with the Allied Control Council. Somebody brought her as a date to her party. So we met, romanced, fell in love, and eventually traveled all over Germany together on weekends in any one of my cars. Zilla and I decided to get married. At this point I was in full denial, so I was there's going to be a big church wedding in a St. Lucas Cathedral, and I was paying everybody with cartons of cigarettes because that was the established currency. So I took I don't know how many cartons of cigarettes to get the singers from the Munich Opera. That was a good wedding and a big party after. The national visas are granted based on the country of birth. As most surviving concentration camp inmates and the survivors, most of them were born in Poland. All the Jewish immigrants going to America were going on a Polish, what's called a quota. They passed a new law in the State Department, and they decided to divide the Polish quota 50-50 to give the non-Jews a break. Okay? So when I learned about it, obviously Zil told me about it, and I was then qualified as a bona fide non-Jew, I jumped at the opportunity. And it was a priest who, writing on his knee, issued me with an affidavit of support, on the basis of which I got my visa. To add to my complicated life story. I entered America on a corporate visa or an affidavit visa by the Catholic Refugee Organization. Well, after 1947, first went to Paris for a few days with her. I had a wonderful time with her. Went clubbing, went to restaurants, bought a beautiful hat with flowers. She always wanted to have a French hat. And went on the SS America to the United States. It was a rough passage, in fact. And I forget there were a group of nuns sitting on the deck, refusing to go down and only continuously getting sick all over the place. So I have always this vision of vomiting nuns. There was a very handsome dark-haired Irishman who just went to Europe to visit a family after the war in Ireland. He got off the boat before I did, so by the time I came down the plank, we were already standing at the pier with open arms, yelling, "Welcome to America, welcome to America." Passing a Statue of Liberty that day, obviously. I was very excited. It was a new land, a new experience, a new chapter in my life. And it was just lovely. It was wonderful. I didn't know what to expect. I was hoping for the best. But only the best will happen for me now.
Niech wszyscy se jadą tak gdzie tylko chcą, do Wiednia, Paryża, Londynu. A jasi z Lwowa nie ruszę za próg, ta mamciu, ta skaże mnie Bóg. Bo gdzie jeszcze ludziom tak dobrze jak tu, tylko we Lwowie, gdzie pieśnią cię budzą i tulą do snu. Tylko we Lwowie, tam bogacz i dziad są wciąż za pan brat i każdy ma uśmiech na twarzy. A panny to ma słodziutkie ten gród, jak sok, czekolada i miód. Bo gdzie jeszcze ludziom tak dobrze jak tu, tylko we Lwowie, gdzie pieśnią cię budzą i tulą do snu. Tylko we Lwowie, tam bogacz i dziad są wciąż za pan brat i każdy ma uśmiech na twarzy. A panny to ma słodziutkie ten gród, jak sok, czekolada i miód. Bo gdzie jeszcze ludziom tak dobrze jak tu, tylko we Lwowie. Ta szkoda gadania, ta co chcesz to mów, nie ma jak Lwów. Możliwe, że więcej ładniejszych jest miast, lecz Lwów jest jedyny na świecie. Ta z niego wyjechać, tak gdzież ja bym mógł, ta mamciu, ta skaże mnie Bóg. Gdybym się jeszcze urodzić miał znów, tylko we Lwowie, ta szkoda gadania, ta co chcesz to mów, nie ma jak Lwów, daj oj.